So the topic of this panel is to focus on evolution and the future of the noosphere. And I thought we might use this time to begin to reflect. We're coming towards the end of this phenomenal conference, and I thought we might use this opportunity to reflect on, certainly on what we've heard so far, and I would like to know what has challenged you all. How might you move outside your comfort zone when you get back to your offices, back to your spaces, and in reflecting on that, what about the theme of the conference, Global South? How does that impact us? I know many of us here are scientists. We study evolution. We think about interdisciplinary sciences. So I would love to hear from that perspective. While you're letting that percolate, I'd like to open it up, let Shima, let you answer first, but I also want to invite you, Shima, just as has been said already, she's done such wonderful work helping organize the conference. I would really love for you to have the opportunity to share a little bit, not only, of course, how the conference has impacted you, but maybe you can even share us a little bit about what you do, your work, your research. I know your interests in mindfulness, but things moving beyond that as well. And I would love to hear how that has impacted you. So, Shima.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciated it. I think first I would like to share a little bit about how the organization of the conference impacted me, and then maybe share a little bit about my work. I think I started, basically I joined UM6P, Institute for Advanced Studies, on April 15. And the purpose of joining here was to write my second book, which was, the aim of that was bringing the wisdom of, Persian wisdom of Fariduddin Attar, Conference of the Birds, to the smart city design. I think I developed a little bit of my book, and after that, we planned, of course, with Raphael and all my other colleagues too, and Francis, of course, to bring the conference to UM6P, co-organized by Human Energy. And at the time, Ben asked Raphael and Francis to invite me to the weekly meetings. So I joined the meetings. And I think gradually, as we shared, I think yesterday, and Francis, I think, said it very nicely, Ben being so kind of welcoming and humble and nice, I think you end up actually doing what he wants you to do. So yes, so I was in the loop. And since then, we started weekly meetings. And I think that focus of, I think maybe I say it this way, that I think we underestimated how the organization of conference, it was difficult. And I say it not difficult in terms of like people are difficult, but it was, I think, something that maybe we don't recognize, especially thinking about noospheric engagements, that the intersubjective, we talk about subjectivity, but I think also there is intersubjectivities between people, and how your way of seeing things really overrides somebody else's way of things. So I think for me, this organization of the conference definitely was a practice, I think heavy, I would say, meditative practice. I really, really saw my own limits. Both in terms of like biases, I think spending 20 years, I think, in Europe, somehow I think makes you close off aspects of yourself in terms of like how the other parts of the world also see and I think process information. So I was very challenged and definitely out of my comfort zone. So back to office, I don't know if I will be back to office because I'm so out of my comfort zone. But I think, as I shared also, I think over dinner with some of you, at the end of the day, or as Raphael always say, maybe even at the beginning of the day, I think people are good. Like really, I think people are actually good. And I think if we just sit with the idea that people are actually, they are well-intentioned most of the time. And if we just be, I think, open enough or practice openness, or exercise our openness muscle, I think we find synergy and we will design, I think, Noosphere. So Noosphere for me now, my conceptualization of Noosphere definitely changed. That is definitely a space of, I think, exercise of your embodied exercise of your being. And I think that is, that's what I share for now on the organization of the conference.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Shima. That's beautiful. Greg, you jump in.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's been most challenging to me is that the conceptual framing of the noosphere and global mind, as you delve into it more deeply, it is increasingly challenging, I think. And so in thinking about what I would talk about, the idea of generation AI and sort of what the impact of the changes that are coming so rapidly towards us and are here in many ways, how that is going to affect us as humans, and really digging into that and realizing how profound those effects will be on an evolutionary scale is very, very powerful. And it's inspired me to, you know, I'm part of the way through a book on that now, about the dissolution of self and sort of what that transformation is going to be. And, you know, I would not have done that without agreeing to come here and sort of engage in a new area. And being here, one of the things that I've felt, which I'm not quite sure what it means, but I think it's very significant. And that is that there's a lot of angst, as though, you know, how are we going to make the noosphere be healthy and a poor noosphere? And it makes me think of like two little blood cells going, oh, I don't know what's going on. How are we going to make sure that they have a happy life and are doing all this? What do you want to do? And this is operating at such a large level, and it's such a dynamic phenomena. And the example that came to mind yesterday evening was, here we think about, oh, we want to design a system, and how are we going to educate people broadly, and how are we going to put this in place, and how are we going to regulate everything? And just in an instant, in the last 2 years, through large language models and where that's leading, we're going to have a universal education for virtually everyone in the world to tap into all of the knowledge resources that we have, to do it verbally where they don't have to have any powerful connection or anything. So that large issue that you could spend lifetimes trying to solve and organize is happening, you know, instantaneously through activity that's completely separate from that problem. And so this sense that we're on this ride, and that it's such a privilege to watch it. And yes, we can affect how it's going to affect us personally and those around us that we love, and maybe a little bit larger realm. But this is happening. I think it's it's dynamic. It's being driven by, you know, basic technological forces. I was trying to think of what individual, other than a few situations like a big assassination or something, would you'd say, had that person not existed, the world would be very different? And I don't think so. I think it's very hard to come up with somebody who has, you know, directed the noospheric evolution. So that's what I've been dealing with around evolution and the framework we've been looking at.
Well, I think everybody will agree that you really can't predict what will happen. Things are going so fast, are so chaotic, are so non-linear. So we really have to think at the largest possible scale, at the most universal possible principles. And so what my life work, you might say, has been on is about self-organization, the principles of how complex systems self-organize. This is essentially an optimistic philosophy. I believe that if you bring a number of agents or agencies together, they interact, they will after a while self-organize. It means they will develop some form of coordinated synergetic activity. But it's not a simplistic view where everything necessarily goes for the better. Sometimes you have kind of local self-organizations that are detrimental to the system, and I call these parasitic modes. So one of the things, for example, that I think that we see in social media are these kind of filter bubbles and echo chambers and conspiracy theories, which are things that kind of self-organize, but they self-organize at the expense of the larger noosphere. That means it's like a tumor in the body. The body as a whole functions pretty well. It's self-organizing, it's distributed. There is no central control in my body that tells this blood cell should go to this vessel and give oxygen to this cell. That's not how it works. We know it is a distributed self-organizing system, but we know that occasionally there is a cell that starts dividing and just selfishly take things from the whole system at the expense of the larger system. So I think the dangers we should be aware of are those. The whole evolution as a whole, I think, is positive, is self-organizing, is developing synergies, but locally there will be these kind of parasitic modes, self-reinforcing things that grow at the expense of the others. Another example of such a parasitic mode, I was discussing that with my colleague Thomas a couple of days ago before the conference. A war, in a sense, is a self-maintaining system. He's going to make a model with using the formalism of chemical organization theory, which is a model of self-organizing systems, that you have a number of agencies in a particular locale. In this case, it was somewhere, I think, in Niger, where the different agents have reasons to continue fighting, and so the war is kind of a self-maintaining system, which of course maintains at the expense of everything else. So I think, if we want to understand and steer the noosphere, first we need to understand these processes of self-organization on the global scale, which are positive, but then also know that sometimes there will be local forms of self-organization that will sap the resources from the larger system that are kind of parasitic.
So I really like that, okay? But emergent phenomena, it's very, very difficult to predict what the structure is when there's complexity and nonlinearity, that what's going to arise from small changes in the relationship at the lower level of organization. And so it seems to me that we're scrambling, trying to kind of understand how those little changes and effects will change the larger structures that emerge and whether they're beneficial and in alignment with us or not. And it's extremely difficult in that so often things that we think of as negative, ultimately in a complex way, they end up as being very positive. And just the opposite occurs as well. It's almost like the, traditional religious framework where, God moves in strange ways, sort of accepting that. So this sense of kind of faith and acceptance is something that is very difficult for many of us, but it's interesting
that's
to
why we had
reflect
this
on.
panel of anguish versus anxiety. I think that was the very main reason we put it in there. I think the work of Raphael really speaks to that, because I think a lot of people have difficulty with that uncertainty. A lot of people actually have, I think, disconnect with this discomfort, that you feel it, I think, at the human levels. It's a feeling that I think helps us to grow toward our evolution, where we want to actually go. So I think that panel really answered that question, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And well, just to pick up on what you're pointing here, Greg, there's this real paradox, right, between what seems to be, we think of good, we think of bad. Our challenge in trying to find the right metaphors for this makes me think about where we were early in this morning, as Suleiman bringing up what we are for and what we are against. And so I'm getting a strong sense of the hands-offness and self-organization, and, well, this may be good, we don't know, it could turn out to be bad, but this may be bad, it might turn out to be good. And yet there's something very distinct, I think, for us as humans, that we are a moral species. So we want to try to stretch that a little bit. We're on the evolution topic a little bit here, and so we have a long history of using scientific language, maybe twisted, of course, from its origins, to articulate perspectives that end up in the things that led us to the subtitle of our conference today, and inequities between the North and the South. So just a prompt to push in this direction. I don't know if I'm being clear, but I can clarify.
You know, and I'm not saying to be inactive. It's really hard to do that. I work very hard at doing things that I think are likely to have very positive outcomes and to bring people together in rich ways that enhance their humanity and their experience in life. I think I'm suggesting a sense of humility about the inadequacy of our projections as we look forward. And also an understanding that, for example, all of the problems that are associated with the internet and social media and connecting ourselves, you know, they're not really very surprising when you step back a little bit, because this is like version 1.0 of how to engage with all of these powerful technologies. And the insight that I had in preparing my talk that I mentioned was the idea that we're totally vulnerable to all of the hacking and all of the AI and everything that's taking advantage of us. We have no AI on our side yet, but we soon will, I'm sure, and the version 2.0 and 2.5, and if we're lucky, you know, we won't have too much trauma associated before we arrive to those. So the things that sort of speed up that evolutionary process, in my view, are likely, if we think about process, the things that accelerate the advances, rather than be very careful and pause and try to understand where they're going to lead before we do them, it's sort of restricting the capabilities of the system to heal itself and protect itself in some way. So that's some of the ideas that I've been having.
I wanted to add another reason for optimism and to go back to the theme of the Global South. I think it was actually Gregory in his book Meta Man who suggested that there is kind of a nervous system building around the globe, and that nervous system up until recently didn't really reach the Global South. There were a few trade lines, of course, but most of the people, especially if you live somewhere here in Africa, in a farming ground, you have very little contact with the rest of the world. And that has started to change with the internet. First, people in Africa and generally in the Global South were very quick to adopt cellular phones. They started using it for all kinds of purposes that in the West we didn't even think of, like using cellular phones to send money from one person to another without having to go via a bank, because there were no banks. I think the technologies we have now will accelerate that whole process. For example, Wikipedia already makes, in principle, anybody with a smartphone able to tap into the knowledge of the world, but Wikipedia is not a very practical method. If you have a particular question now via AI, if you are a farmer somewhere in Africa and your crops are suffering from some parasite, you could in principle ask ChatGPT what is the problem and what you should do about it. And then it can contact you immediately with the closest supplier or of whatever the remedy is for this parasite you have. I mean, these things will extend the circulatory system and the nervous system of the noosphere into the tiniest villages in the Global South, and that will be an immediate boost to combat poverty, to cover ignorance. I think this is going on at this moment, and that's also one of the reasons why this university is very forward-looking, progressive, gathering all the intellect for Africa and specifically looking at the problems of African farmers here. I think this is an example of how the noosphere should work and how it will work. So that's the problems, especially of the Global South. I think the noosphere is the best way, the quickest way to solve these.
Something I wanted to add, building on what Francis said, is like one of my very, I think, pleasant surprises since I joined Institute for Advanced Studies and UM6P is that the positive energy that the ecosystem has, also how I think engaged all the faculties and people and students are basically with a noospheric vision. And I think we should also not forget that even though that the noosphere was coined by Vernadsky and Théodore de Chardin, Islamic literature and has a long-standing affiliation with the vision of noosphere. Montasir, my colleague, earlier evoked the concept of wahdat wujud, I say it in Farsi, that is the unity of being. And unity of being is something that in Islamic, basically, thinking and Sufism is really emphasized, that we are parts of an interconnected whole, that whatever basically we do to others, it actually affects ourselves. So I think bearing in mind that the Global South has a rich, I think, affiliation with the noosphere, and I think it's very important to kind of make connection to that, make connection to these existing reservoirs of wisdom that exist. So I think people necessarily don't look for a vision of Teilhard just because it's coined by Teilhard. There are Teilhardian schools of thinking by Ibn Arabi, Ghazali, and other Islamic thinkers. And I think that is very important to kind of bring this. I think we talked about moving beyond tribes, and I think my colleague also Nawal mentioned in terms of like business adaptation, how we can move from tribal to national. I think also we need to keep the pride that exists within the societies, within culture, so that they can engage actively with the noospheric world that we want to create. So I think for me this is very essential.
Yeah, thank you, Shima, for bringing that in. I mean, there's such a Teilhardian focus and emphasis because of the term noosphere, I think, and the recognition of the shared schools of thinking in this way, the unity of being in Islam. There's another term that I don't think has been mentioned here yet, although Ubuntu, another concept to arise from the Global South. I am because we are. I'm paraphrasing, I think that's about right. But we had I think it was Heinrich who we had hoped to come to speak on that topic, was unable to come, Heinrich Volming. And so that's one of the places where I think sometimes, you know, our language, you know, there's not as much of a barrier as we think there is. So I appreciate you bringing that in. I want to ask a sort of specific question of each of you, or a specific question for each of you to answer, of course. But that was a moment to kind of reflect on the challenges you've seen in the conference and how that's moved your thinking. I'd like to know kind of concretely going forward for you, like what and Greg, I know you heard from your book perhaps, but what do you think will bring the noosphere into being in the daily life, in your daily life?
I
And
think
just to, like I heard from Shima, her discussion of the, you know, conference planning as a meditation. I'm kind of curious about the sort of daily life moments, not just our conceptual, abstract developments as academics and scholars.
Well, I have been living in the noosphere from the 1990s. If you equate a noosphere with the World Wide Web, I was one of the first ones to adopt the World Wide Web. I was the first one in Belgium to have a World Wide Web server. So in that respect, for me, it has been something obvious. But there is another aspect which is less obvious, and then I want to tie in back into the Global South. I'm not so familiar with the Islamic philosophy. I'm more familiar from the non-Western philosophies with the Chinese Taoism and the Indian Buddhism. But there are also the earlier philosophies that are generally described as animism, which are the kind of philosophies we find in indigenous people, especially hunter-gatherers, which are these ideas that the whole world is alive and is one big network of agents. And that is, I think, a very important philosophy, which in Europe we have lost. In Europe, with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, there was this idea of dualism. There is the material world that follows mechanical laws, and then there is the human being that has consciousness, and the human being is the governor, the one that has the power, the one that makes decision, and the rest is just passive material. Now, these more holistic philosophies like Taoism, they say no, the human is not so special, we are just part of this big network, and that's also what animism does. So what I have done much more recently is I've started to formulate this philosophy in a scientific manner, because the reason that the worldview has become dominant is because the European worldview led to science, which was a method to develop and conserve knowledge much more efficiently than older methods of traditional teaching. Science was a very strong vehicle for this whole expansion, but science now, it can no longer be Newtonian science. Now we have this complexity science, but this complexity science still can't grapple well with this relational view. So I developed this ontology, which I call relational agency, which is, you might say, the contemporary view of animism or Taoism, and which can be expressed in a scientific manner, which you can use mathematics to express, which you can use computer simulations to work with, which you can describe ecosystems with, which you can describe the noosphere with. So I think this is a very important view for the future, that is that our science needs to be updated to also incorporate this older, animistic, relational, holistic perspective of the world. So in that sense, I think that European science and much older indigenous traditions are ready to meet and to synthesize.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up to that, Francis? Your talk on awe, and it was beautiful, and you had like the photography of the waterfall. It's somewhat of a personal question. I wonder if does that come into your embodiment as you're with like that animistic perspective? Do you feel that?
Yes, exactly. And I read a very nice book, Becoming Animal, by David Abram, who is a philosopher anthropologist who has been working with these indigenous people and has managed to kind of interiorize their worldview, their animistic worldview, and he really shows how once you get into this mode, you can start to feel the aliveness of the trees and the branches and the birds and even the rocks. Yes, you can use these emotions to feel the world in a much more alive world. While I think especially, I think it's one of the worst things about social media is people are constantly looking at this little screen and they are disconnected from the real material living world. I think that's one of the worst aspects of it. You need to go into nature and to commune and to interact with the living things, with the rocks, with the water, with the clouds, with the wind. You need to feel that in your body, and that helps you to feel part of this larger whole.
And Michael, I like that question, and for me, it is very much an embodied experience, and one that is, the awe, the sense of that, because, you walk in any city, and we're at the heart of this, like, human termite colony. It's amazing. I just wander, and I go, how does this work? All of you imagine the metabolism and the things that are coming in, and being taken out, and you get on a plane and you're over here at a meeting, and somehow it all works, and it's hard to even figure it out. So it's amazing. That's one thing, and that's a very real feeling I get when I walk in New York and I'm looking at these towers of glass and concrete, and this is not the environment of our Pleistocene ancestors, and that we can survive in that and sort of be a part of it and perceive it. And I think that's the importance of this story, is it gives that sense of amazement to people. And so that's something that's really extraordinary, and it fills me with a sense of gratitude at what a privilege it is to be alive at this moment when this birth is occurring, and to be able to be observers of it, but to be architects of it as well. And it's not surprising that we're, you know, anxiety is all over the place because we're the objects of these changes as well, and who the hell knows where it carries us individually. So those things are very important. And the other is that to see this world, all of the things that we're constructing, and to see them as natural as anything, plants or any of the objects that people generally view as natural, so that there's not this dichotomy, this disharmony, this humanity has created this cancer, this pox on the world, that it's this magical expression of life. Where else does it come from? So all of those things are very spiritual to me. They're very powerful, and they create a sense of, you know, privilege, amazement, awe in the world. And I think that, to me, that's what's so important about the third story and what the Human Energy Foundation is, or the Human Energy is trying to do, because that's a very different way to live than live with a feeling of oppression and pathology.
Yeah, the challenge to be in reverence, in awe of this planetarium, like room we are in as much as the waterfall, as I hear what you're saying, Greg. Yeah. Shima, would you
I just
say any more?
very quickly, I think very, very short comment. I think Francis and Greg, I think, shared very beautiful thoughts. I think just owning the world that we are building and not projecting it to artificial intelligence, or we still have the habit of saying it will replace us, it will do that. But who is that it? It's us. I mean, I think just, I think this moment, this critical moment is a very spiritual moment. It's a very transformative moment. We can look inside ourselves. And I think for me, the entire, how I built my career is about really turning the lens inward. I have a mathematical and engineering background, and we look outside. We design things based on measuring and building structures. And we think that's the world. But I think the real world is happening inside us. And I think during my career, from my PhD onward, I wanted to bring mindfulness. I wanted to bring different traditions, Sufism, and now I am Buddhist. But bringing Sufism, that was my from Iran, basically, place I was born, to I think what I call in my latest research, to reclaim the light of technology, to reclaim the light of our built infrastructure, because they do actually play a positive role in the evolution and future of the noosphere.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wanted to sort of shift things a little bit here. One of the requests I think we've had over time with the back-to-back nature of the talks was that maybe there wasn't as much time as we could have had for audience participation. So I wanted to give you all a chance here. If there's questions that you'd like to bring forward to this group or to the whole room, especially as we're starting to move towards the end. We're in this giant circle, but we're not obviously not perfectly sitting in a circle. But it evokes to me that image of wanting to hear from others in here. Jevon?
They will give it. No, they will bring it.
Thank you again for all your brilliant talks. I really enjoyed it so much, and I just have comments and questions. If we're talking about the noosphere as something teleologic, it has telos, it has direction, and we are a part of it. So where does it come from? Is it like the noosphere, or this intentionality comes through us and not from us, and though it is with us, it belongs not to us? We don't really know, like, from which this intentionality comes from the noosphere itself that we're shaping increasingly, or from us that we are nurturing this noosphere. And the second thing is about the optimism and the positive impact on this noosphere. And I stumbled upon this beautiful concept called pronoia. It's from Brezhnev, I think. And as an antidote to paranoia, if paranoia is connecting the dots in a way that feels like the world is against us, so pronoia, it would be connecting the dots in a way that the world is serving us. And my final question would be about this notion of always insisting on optimism. We know that the world is made of yin and yang. We know that we don't have the same conception of good and bad. We don't know about the climate change, if it's a hoax or real. A lot of people think it's not real. So the noosphere, would it be something that englobes all of this, where all the contradictions are reconciled? Or would it just take position about some certain things? And finally, I just want to thank you both and Shima as well for your philosophical insights. We need that conception. We need to get rid of dichotomy, as you said, Greg. And yeah, so I think Kevin Kelly said it best. We're smack in the middle between the born and the made, and it's all coming from the same constituents. So just want to thank you again for all your brilliant insights.
Thank you for that. The trio of questions here, from telos to pronoia to do we necessarily need to insist on optimism?
I think I want to go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss the intentionality, because that's one of the problems that I've been thinking about a lot. So one of the aspects of the AI that I find most difficult is this idea of the omega point. It means that evolution is directed to a particular outcome. I believe that evolution is directed in the sense that certain directions will not happen. There is a certain preference for certain things, and it's a preference for what I call synergy. If you are in a relationship with some other agent that is conflictual, either the relationship will stop or one of the two agents will be eliminated. Conflict does not last. Synergy, on the other hand, lasts. Once you are in a synergetic relationship, both or everybody profits, and so you build on it. So there is a directionality to evolution, a directionality towards self-organization, towards synergy, and you can't say that it is the noosphere that is doing it, or you can't say that it's the humans that are doing it. All elements are constantly trying to adapt to their environment, and their environment, of course, consists of all these other elements. So we are all constantly trying to adapt to whatever we are interacting with, and that interaction eventually settles into a more synergetic version. So that is the directionality, but it's not goal-directedness. There is no endpoint, there is no goal. So I think that's one of the teleology, the big problem is that people tend to interpret it in some kind of a religious way, like God has made a plan for the universe and now we are fulfilling that plan. That's not how evolution works, but neither is evolution random. Evolution has a preference for more adaptation, more fitness, more synergy, more life. That is the direction of evolution. So you can't predict where it will end up, but you can predict it will continue in that direction.
I think I'm going to answer a little bit the question of focus on positivity. I don't agree that we need to only focus on positivity. My life has never been like always positive, and I think if we and the best moments I had in my life came out of overcoming actually challenges. So I think that's very important. And Michael, I think Pearson also mentioned something positive, realistically optimist. That is, we have to understand that we are faced with complex challenges, big challenges. At the same time, the noosphere is a space of traumas, pains, and difficulties, and at the same time, potentiality. So if you just want to have the positive story of the noosphere or a positive story of the future, of the future that we want to create, I think we are depriving ourselves our absolute capacity for transformation. And I think that is also speaking to what you said, Francis, about intentionality of evolution. Evolution, I think, favors transformation. People who are open to adaptability to transformations. I think that is like an interconnection between the two. If we really are looking for intentionality, we have to be actually looking at the reality of we're facing. We have wars around the world. We're facing difficulties, especially in the Global South, in the Middle East. So if we want to blind ourselves to those challenges, I think we are not going to do to ourselves justice. So I think that's, for me, is very, very crucial.
Yeah, I think I would like to respond to that too, the sense of optimism. I've been accused of being a Pollyanna about things. And to me, that's just that's an internal state of how you're perceiving things. There are incredible amounts of pain and horrible things that happen, and life is difficult. And, you know, do we accept that? Do you choose to see it's like that glass half empty or half full? You know, there are amazing things that are going on. And if you look from historical perspectives, this is one of the most difficult times emotionally to live in for people. And yet it is, you know, the dream of kings, essentially, all of the things that we have available to us, music all the time. I mean, look at, in the last 30 or so years, the population that's within the sort of global economy has essentially doubled. I think there have been about 3 billion people added. And it's so astonishing to me that things have been as smooth as they have been in a transition like that. And so you can sort of, and I think that some of the dissatisfaction comes, we're talking about this at one of the meals, is that it used to be that you couldn't envision the possibilities because we didn't have the technology to make that possible. So the gulf between what might be and what is larger than it has ever been, which is very, you know, frustrating to so many people. But the absolute level of where we're at compared to where the population in general has been, what they've suffered from, what they've dealt with in terms of disease and education and possibilities and everything, is better than it has ever been. And so, and as far as pain and overcoming that, you know, think of your children. You try to protect them from pain and disappointment and hurt and all of those things. And yet, if you were successful in that, they would turn into people that would be completely uninteresting to you. Because, at least in my life, it's the challenges and the pains and the things that I've overcome that have been the crucible for forming the personality that, you know, I very much value. And an example of that is a question that I've asked to people. I do questions. So I'm about to publish a book of questions on living with chronic illness. One of the questions is, this is for people with very serious chronic diseases of one sort or another, is if you could go back to your first time of experiencing symptoms, and, well, from the present, you had a choice. You could either go back to that moment, be cured, and live your life again, completely healthy. You could be cured at present and continue forward without that disease, which is often very painful, or you could just continue forward the way you are. What's astonishing to me, I've probably asked that to many, many, many people. Not a single person with a very serious disease has said they would want to go back and be cured, because they so value the experiences that they've earned and what it's meant to them. And many people say they would not want to be cured at all, because it has become such a way that they see themselves, you know, and that they live. And it's a very interesting thing. I don't know, but it's surprising to me.
Thank you, Greg. That's a very powerful example. Yes.
Yeah, thank you from the heart to Human Energy and UM6P and Shima and everyone who made this possible. It was a very rich and perspective-shifting experience the last few days. From the perspective of next generations, one of the things that you can hear me? Oh, it's hard to hear you. Oh, you can. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. From the perspective of next generations, one of the things that inspires me is that we do not need to reinvent the wheel. We can build upon the legacies and the wisdom and the know-how and expertise out there in the world and unfolding our own myth and our own story. And it seems that the noospheric line of thinking helps us to understand, not only map out evolution and the role of human development, but also look at the rise of civilizations and the origination of great disciplines that we have been addressing the last few days, but also the radical inventions and innovations in the world that changed many eras and marked new epochs. And what inspired me the last few days is that this perspective shifting understanding also invites us to actually initiate a new lineage of intellectual inquiry where we're invited to tap from multiple sources of intelligence. And this is something that I think since the rise of modern science, we have been fractured in, and perhaps this was one of our fracture points as much as it was also the origination of so much development. So I wondered, I think Sheila also mentioned how we can actually reconcile both hemispheres of the brain, both the reasoning, the logical, the analytical, but also the imaginative, the poetic, the intuitive, and how the noospheric line of thinking can help us to cultivate this in generating the most necessary solutions for our time. And what are then the conducive conditions to enable this so that this can become liberatory is one of the things that very much inspired me the last few days. Thank you again.
Thank you for that. I certainly have some thoughts. I can jump in if you'd like. There's a lot that you said there. It's Saren, right? Saren. So thank you for sharing. Where you ended, of course, on this, how do we balance this imaginative, intuitive, the two hemispheres, and what was evoked, of course, I think also implicitly in that is there's also a global north, global south. I know Boris S. Shoshitaishvili had invoked that also in his conversation. It brings to my mind the work of Ian McGilchrist and both the master and the emissary and his work on the matter with things. In that case, he's very clear that the intuitive, the imaginative is the master, if you will. That what we deploy is our rational mind in the service of the intuitive, the imaginative, and the creative, to seek out details and bring them back to them so that they can be held within the larger picture, within a larger frame. I don't know quite how that maps into the current noosphere, other than clearly there is it evokes to me the need for the dialogue between the two, and the clear sense that there's some deeper sharing, some not only the deeper sharing, but the bigger picture, whatever that is. I don't know. Clearly the humility, I think, is a center here. So thank you for sharing that. It sounds like...
I think how to make it like the big question, and I think perhaps nobody knows. I think that's the best answer. I think nobody knows, but I think it is happening. It's the dialogue and conversation about bringing more of like more creative, intuitive way of design, creative, intuitive way of collaborations, and I think poetry, I think it's happening. I think it's already happening, especially when we look at, for example, on trauma recovery, bringing holistic like well-being, like psychedelic practices or rituals. I think it's already happening in a couple of disciplines, but I think it requires building up of momentum, and I think it will happen naturally because I think if other people engage with it, it will roll out on its own.
Yeah, and as I reflect on what your question, which is a very interesting one, it feels to me that it naturally is sort of an expression of us as individuals. And how do we reconcile left and right brain and such? It seems to me that the question is actually much, much bigger. And that is that our consciousness, our awareness, our creativity, all of these things is expanding beyond us as individuals. And all of those elements of human expression and cognitive interaction and creativity and everything are being mixed in all sorts of ways within the noospheric environment. And that dissolution of self that I mentioned is something that's what we're going to be grappling with in my view. Who we are in this realm, what the individual is, how we combine with one another, because it is getting so powerful, or is it the cusp of that? And it's going to create all sorts of new structures that are not just organic cognition and cognitive activity, but inorganic, different changes of substrate, changes of lifespan, changes of merging of different individuals that are mixing and matching, which becomes possible when there's a certain level of uploading or extended cognitive activity. So I think it's just going to be amazingly complex in ways that we hardly can imagine now, and very rapidly.
I think something else that came to my mind is that although that it's a very big question, but at the same time it brings back to the power of individuals. Like, how can we do that? You can do that. I can do that. We can do that. I think that's probably the way it will happen. So it's really the individual. And I think yesterday with the workshop and the rite of passage of Robinson, our intention was really evoking that active engagement with the noosphere, that I engage with the noosphere because I know that my impact will have a positive influence on the noosphere. So I think being in that space, I think it in itself is valuable. Instead of just focusing on the outcome of that, I think just bringing ourselves in that openness and capacity to engage with the world in a more active way. I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. You have one more thing you'd like to say?
Let me just say one more thing about that I just thought of, which I think it's really interesting, is that almost everybody thinks creatively. We all dream. We have dreams. We have all of these visions. The challenge is the translation of that into something that can be consumed and is revealed to others. And I think that the obstacles to that are becoming ever more diminished, in that we can express that because the techniques and the crafts that are required to create a film, to create some expression of that, are really diminishing. And so there's going to be a flourishing of the expression of those sorts of aspects of the human mind and of the human existence.
So I think we're going to need to wrap up. I'll make one comment just in the spirit of thanking everybody also for organizing the concert last night, that our participation in creativity need not be that we are the ones creating some rarefied form of art that goes into a museum, but yet we can participate. To see many of us just dancing and moving in the field yesterday, that is very evocative, I think, of also places we might go as the noosphere.
Yeah, thank you.